Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I sat and listened to the beginning of this debate, my heart simply broke. And many people know me for being able to do alliterations, and all I could think about was amnesia allows adolescent accountability avoidance agility from across the aisle. So work with me for a second. Imagine being a young man born to Jamaican and Panamanian parents who messed up not once but twice. Imagine standing in front of a judge with your whole future hanging in the balance, and instead of prison, you are given a promise of mercy. Your record gets wiped clean. You get a second chance at life. Now imagine taking that promise and turning it into promotion. You go to college, you get a job, and even become a member of Congress. That's what redemption looks like. That's what America is supposed to be about. And that is exactly the story of the next wannabe governor from Florida. As a young man, he went through pretrial diversion for misdemeanor marijuana possession. As an adult, yet younger than 24, he was charged with and ultimately placed on probation for felony bribery charges, which ultimately were 2 expunged. He was given a 3rd chance, and now he's the face of a bill that would not afford young people in Washington, D.C. the same opportunities afforded to him. Let me be real. If he had grown up under Donald Trump's America or under the very D.C. crime bill he's pushing today, he wouldn't be standing here as a member of Congress. He'd still be living with the weight of those charges. So let's call this what it is, opportunities for me, but not for thee. He climbed the ladder of redemption, and now he's yanking it right up from the D.C. youth. See, most of us were taught to lift as you climb, but clearly some have forgotten to lift as they climb, and now they are committed to telling the next generation to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. I will not sit quiet while a man who was saved by grace turns around and tries to snatch grace away from others. If we're going to be real about crime, about communities,
Gentlelady's time has expired.
I'd like to yield for an additional minute, please.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
About second chances and even third chances, then it needs to start with us looking in the mirror and remembering that even the author of this bill has a story too before he tries to lecture DC on safety. And it would be complete hypocrisy to have, hypothetically, someone convicted of 34 felonies to lecture DC on what to do with youthful offenders who have been scientifically shown not to have fully developed brains under the age of 25, especially if said multi-count convicted felon was in his 70s when he was convicted. What would be his excuse? Because his brain would be fully developed. And with that, I will yield back.
When Representative Jasmine Crockett stood up during the debate over the D.C. crime bill, she didn't just speak. She held up a mirror to the entire chamber. She began by reminding us that the man pushing this bill wasn't always the polished politician we see today. He was once a young man who made serious mistakes, not once, but twice. And yet, instead of being buried by those mistakes, he was granted something rare in the justice system: mercy. First, he was caught with marijuana and allowed to avoid prison through pretrial diversion. Then, he was charged with felony bribery. That, too, was resolved with probation and later wiped from his record. 2 strikes, 2 second chances. And what did he do with them? He rebuilt. He went to college. He built a life. And eventually, he found himself elected to Congress. That is the very definition of redemption. That is what the American justice system claims to believe in, that people can change, that they can turn their lives around if given a chance. But Crockett's outrage was that this same man, who owes his career to second chances, is now championing legislation that would deny that grace to others. She asked the obvious but uncomfortable question: if his own bill had applied to him, would he even be standing here today? The answer is almost certainly no, and that's where the hypocrisy becomes impossible to ignore. It's not just about policy differences. It's about who deserves forgiveness and who doesn't. It's about how some people get the benefit of the doubt, while others, often poor, often black or brown, often from places like D.C., are given only punishment. Crockett captured that hypocrisy in a phrase that cut straight to the bone: opportunities for me, but not for thee. He climbed the ladder of redemption, she said, but instead of extending his hand to pull others up, he yanked the ladder away. This is where her words moved from politics to principle, because what she was really asking America to consider is this: what kind of justice system do we want? One that reflects mercy and redemption, or one that locks people out forever for the very mistakes that the powerful once survived? And she didn't stop at hypocrisy. Crockett brought science into the conversation. She reminded us that the human brain isn't fully developed until around age 25, that young people are literally wired for impulsive choices and also wired for change. That's why systems of justice across the world give youth more room for rehabilitation. If we ignore that science, she warned, we risk sentencing not just a young person's present, but their entire future. Then, in one of the most striking turns of her speech, she flipped the script. Imagine someone convicted of 34 felonies at age 70. At that age, the brain is fully developed. There's no scientific excuse for poor judgment. And yet, even then, some demand leniency or forgiveness. So why is forgiveness available for some, but denied to teenagers whose lives are still being formed? Crockett wasn't just defending DC's youth, she was exposing a double standard that runs through the very core of our justice system. Her speech was more than a rebuttal. It was a call to remember that justice should not be selective. If America truly believes in redemption, it cannot be a privilege reserved for the powerful, the wealthy, or the well-connected. It has to extend to the young man in DC who made a mistake just as much as it extended to a future congressman who did the same. And that's what makes Crockett's words resonate beyond the walls of Congress. This debate isn't just about a single bill. It's about whether we want a system built on punishment or on possibility. It's about whether we allow grace only when it benefits us, or whether we extend it, knowing that redemption is what keeps America's promise alive. So here's the takeaway. Crockett's message forces us to confront our own contradictions. We cheer stories of second chances when they end with a seat in Congress, but we forget the countless young people whose futures are erased before they even begin. And maybe the real measure of justice isn't how harshly we punish, but how bravely we forgive. If we want a safer, stronger society, it doesn't come from slamming doors shut, it comes from keeping pathways open. And Crockett's speech is a reminder that those pathways should be open for everyone, not just the lucky few. So, if you believe redemption shouldn't just be a privilege but a right, share this, talk about it, and keep the conversation alive. Because the future of justice in this country depends on whose stories we choose to honor and whose chances we choose to take away.